my requirement is I have to be able to say I view Fox as a right-wing propaganda network. And they always say, sure, say whatever you want. We're not going to restrict you. Um, what has happened with the left is that the left has fallen in love with the idea that there's a narrative, it's statecraft, and that no one may contradict it, or that person is effectively a bad person from the extreme right, or a wackadoodle, or somebody who's grifted in the 90s. It really got going, roughly speaking, I would say around 2008 crisis. And I do think that these spaces are effectively where the discussion has moved.
I appreciate it, Eric. John, I see you jump back on. You want to take your last quick question, John? Because Eric does have to jump off.
No, I mean, I have a commentary, but I think that the one point which Eric, I think, brilliantly made was the comparison to Bork. And if you were to look at the definition of what it means to Bork, a candidate, it's to systematically defame or vilify someone. And I can very, very, very clearly see this becoming the opening up of our prosecutorial system to something very akin to what happened with Robert Bork around Supreme Court nominations. So my question to Eric would be, and thank you for your comment, for taking the time to join us, would be, what would you say your time horizon is for something like that happening? How fast do you think the degradation will occur?
It's an interesting question. I just read a tweet that was responding to this space that said, Eric, we no longer believe in fictions. We are giving fictions a bad name. And I hate to say it, but theater and fictions are essential. The number of people who've decided that this whole system has to be burnt to a crisp and that it's unsalvageable, and that we have to dispense with fictions and pursue the truth, and all, or that we have to, the time for trying to find common ground is over, and we have to decide that this is a partisan fight. This number is growing and growing, and this is an unsustainable Jenga tower with everybody pulling as many blocks out of it as we possibly can. I really wish what we were talking about is what's going on with alternate currencies and petroleum. I really wish that what we were talking about was the nuclear dangers of what happens if we back Putin into a corner. I really wish we were talking about the need for technically capable people with military service to run for office. And reaching across the aisle. I just want to say, something kind of corny and ridiculous. Many of you will take this as sort of Lex Friedman speak. We've got to show each other a lot more love and a lot more decency and a lot more civility. And it's one of the reasons that I can come on and say I've been fighting, Trump. I actually do think he's an existential risk. But, I didn't vote for Biden because I think Biden is an existential risk. Increasingly, everything swamp is not working. When is the Jenga tower going to fall? I couldn't tell you, but I can tell you that if we just keep pulling blocks out and finding this entertaining and getting right back into the weeds and not noticing, the big story, which is that we effectively, we were swimming at the beach and we went into the beach. There was a tremendous tide. And if you enter the beach in Los Angeles and you come out in Tijuana, you haven't realized that you were pulled along by the current because you were just hanging out with your friends in the water. I think what's happening here is we are getting dragged. And some of us are just going to have to say, no, I want to go back to an earlier version of democracy, America, science. It's got its flaws. It has problems. There are fictions galore inside of it. But it's sure as hell better than this thing that nobody has confidence in. And if, by the way, and this is going to be extremely unpopular. I hope to lose a lot of followers. If you think that just saying truth, truth, truth is the answer, or saying let's just go by the letter of the law, you're going to find that you have a world that is not the world you thought you were building. It's very important that we allow culture, decency, forgiveness, and all the things that I value about, sort of good Abrahamic philosophy. We have got to get back to our own cultural basis where we care about fairness, even above, whether something is technically true or technically wrong. There are lots of times that the law returns an answer which is clearly wrong. And it would be great to have a little bit of discretion so that we can use forgiveness, generosity of spirit, positivity, and a focus on things that we actually can do to make the country better, rather than watching septuagenarians and octogenarians battle it out to take the place of real advancements in science and decency and health as we sort of find things to do to occupy our empty lives. I think that this is preposterous. And thank you guys all for being a great group.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate you jumping on, man. So, guys, John, I know you wanted to add on to what Eric was saying. I think it was a great discussion, and I want to get some thoughts on, because there's a lot of points made, and still the point that Eric made, and I want to get Slayman, get your thoughts on which point hit you the hardest. But for me, it's just a very simple one: is that this is the justice system on trial instead of Trump, and for us, instead of discussing, I think in a lot of our spaces, we discuss how this will impact Trump's re-election. Is this politically motivated? Is he guilty? Is he not? I think we all agree that even I think also you mentioned the CNN poll, that most people, as a CNN poll, do think this is politically motivated.
I think that's important too.
Yeah, I do, and I think, but do you agree? Actually, also, so I'll go to you first. In what Eric said,
On trial since the foundation of America. Like I've used this example time and time and time again, and it's just reinforcing this notion that there is a two-tier justice system. If you're poor, or if you're a minority, you're screwed. Like what Nick said. Oh, let's go to Wall Street. Like, how many people in Wall Street would have committed a crime? Really? That is the argument we're going to use, and somehow that is acceptable. When you have, I know people.
But you've had, but also let me elaborate on the question. I'll let you continue making your point, but yeah. I just want to elaborate on the question. Considering that no other president has ever been indicted, doesn't that show that the system is showing some cracks? I understand, and this is not a major. These are not major charges, and I think you'd agree. I would say, I even asked that question. I'm like, doesn't that show the judicial system working? Because another way of looking at it is that like politics is starting to stretch the law and leverage the law for and kind of start breaking.
Of course there's going to be politics, just like in Congress. Like, that is a risk you have of election. You have flip sides. How do you want to run a country? Do you want to have countries that are accountable to an election to the citizenry, or do you want officials that are appointed and apolitical, but they don't answer to the citizens? Right? You're just you have Trump is Eric even acknowledged, and I think we all acknowledge Trump is not a typical politician, but not in this sense that Trump is somehow not. But Eric also said it. Like, Trump admitted his own levels of corrupt practices, right? He was very open about it, and I think we all know that Trump has operated in a way that has
can you elaborate on that also? What are you talking?
You can look at it and say he did not follow norms.
You're saying he admitted.
What I'm saying, like, Trump opened to, but clearly those aspects and practices that he has done are not traditional and normal, and a lot of people would argue not only immoral but illegal. Right. The difference is there was just no accountability to whatever action he did.
Hold on, I'm not tracking with you here, because you're making some point about how this is just like the challenges that we've always been, and then you're saying that some obvious illegalities of what Trump has done. I mean,
the notion
argument
of justice.
Because there. Hold on, let me finish the question. Because there are obvious illegalities in the sense that you're saying it. There are obvious illegalities about what Obama's done. There are obvious illegalities about what George W. Bush did as president. There are even more obvious illegalities of what Bill Clinton did as president. So the obvious illegality argument is really just a smokescreen. Because, see, here's the thing. Our justice system is under a very unique trial right now. It is very unique in American history. The only similar trial to our judiciary that we had was in the mid to late 19th century and even early 20th century, when we had decisions, rogue decisions, I would say, to support either slavery or concepts along the lines of Plessy v. Ferguson, the separate but equal. Now, that was a major problem in our judiciary system. But other than that, until recent years, the way that we operated as a judiciary, in a judicial sense, was frankly pretty balanced and corrective as well, because Brown v. Board of Education.
Jim, I think there's a lot of Americans who would fundamentally disagree with that notion, and I think we're all in agreement. I mean, again, Nick said it, and a lot of panelists here said it. If you're in Wall Street, how many of them broke the law and they wouldn't get charged? Okay, and that somehow is acceptable, right? And so,
But I'm making the
what
same
I'm
case for
arguing is,
presidents, Allsworth.
let me finish this point. Let me finish this point. What I'm trying to say is, there are obviously the issues of Trump is that there was never any accountability to his actions, either political from his own political party, the judiciary, etc. There was not this accountability. Now, we can make an argument, is this right or wrong? Was this a politically motivated prosecution, etc.? My fundamental issue with this whole conversation is this idea, this notion that if Trump is declared innocent or guilty or whatever it may be, is kind of like, we're framing it as almost as like the death of American judiciary. And I'm like, dude, okay, let's not be hyperbolic. Most people around America, most people,
listen,
hold on.
I get it. But I
Let
gotta
me finish my point, guys.
Guys,
I
yeah.
didn't
Also,
do
I'll
that.
let you quickly. Yeah, I did. Just also, I'll let you finish quickly your point, Simon. I know you had a question as well. Go ahead. Also.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that, look, I've always said in the past, other countries, they've indicted former presidents, and they continue on. In the United States, with Trump, Americans live their lives. Like, yes, there's always going to be segments of America who do not believe in the notion of America or whatever. Fine, but that's always been the case. This idea that somehow now, that the present time we're living is somehow way crazier or worse than any part of American history, when we went through a lot worse. If Trump is declared innocent or guilty, 60% of the American population aren't going to give a damn. They're going to continue to move on, and nothing's going to happen. Like, let's not think this is the death of American democracy. We're opening the Pandora's box. Like, let's just tone it down a little bit and just let the justice system go through.
Did you say?
I disagree
Sorry,
emphatically. I would really push back on that, and that's exactly if you read any book around, and I don't want to go. This is just an example, so don't lose your mind. But if you were to read Edward Luttwak's How to Stage a Coup d'etat, what does he say the number one staging factor for success is? It's when the people are apathetic. Apathy is not a good thing. To say that people are going to stay at home,
that is a terrible comparison, a terrible example.
It's not. Excuse me.
No way.
Excuse me. Let me finish my point. What I see this as a parallel to is the Dreyfus affair in the Francophone world, where many people may have shared your same sentiment. Many French people may have gone on with their world, and then people came out like Émile Zola with J'accuse, the famous open letter in response to the Dreyfus affair. And he famously said, what petty whims of few higher-ups trampling the nation under their boots, ramming down their throats the people's cries for truth and justice with the travesty of state security as a pretext. I think that's very, very, very resounding today. Yes, maybe it's just one example of one thing with a seemingly small, and we can discuss the legal aspect of it, but it's totally absurd, charge to a former president. But this is opening up the Pandora's box that Mr. Weinstein excellently outlined around prosecutorial targeting. And it's even worse.
John, maybe it's a good. Hold on, I'll let you finish. But maybe it's a good Pandora's box. I'm just trying to play devil's advocate. Maybe now that Trump's been indicted, in the future, former presidents will be held accountable more often, and Trump was just the first.
But this isn't even related to the fact that he was. I'll finish my point, and I won't be long. Look, you can beat a political opponent at the ballot box, not through judicial action. It's no serious prosecutor worth their salt would run this case.
So John, let me. Question.
Hold on, Mario, please. This is the judicial, and I agree. So to directly answer the question that you had posed, and which Eric Weinstein had laid out, is the justice system on trial? Absolutely, because this is, in my opinion, un-American, and I think it's an example of corruption laid bare, where an elected prosecutor is delivering on a campaign promise using trumped-up federal charges in a state court. So I don't see this holding up. And
okay, so I've got John. Let me ask you one quick question. I know others are dying to speak, but just one quick question. First, I agree with what you're saying. I think this is politically motivated. I think that the justice system is on trial, but I'm trying to question. I always try to question anything I believe. So if you look at Trump right now, if this was Trump, whatever number of years ago, before he was president, before he was a candidate, would you have had the same argument, or it would be a very different story and you think the indictment is fair and the justice system will do its thing, and he'll be found innocent or guilty.
Trump would have
Before he
never
was
been
a candidate.
charged pre-presidency on these charges. There's no world
Okay.
that would have happened. Now, the first thing, because we could talk about the legal aspect, such as the fact that this is past the statute of limitations, and if it wasn't tied to federal campaign finance violations, then you couldn't even bring it in a New York court. So it's actually a federal crime. But regardless, they're bringing
based
it
on
in
your
court because it's political. Now, the second point is, no, I don't think it would be the same thing, because he's a former president. We have different
No,
standards.
I know. So, but no, you've already. So that's okay. So if you said yes, then I'd be like, why should we have different standards for former presidents? And that would be a different argument. But since you said no, that this indictment still wouldn't be fair, even if Trump was not a candidate or was a former president. If you said it's not fair still, as just a normal citizen, then obviously the argument that this is fair now is, and just because he's a former president should not have any exceptions, wouldn't apply anymore based on your argument. So I think that was a good answer. I think other
Mario,
speakers.
it's
Yeah,
a
go ahead.
case without moral authority.
I actually think
That's it.
there should be an exception, because if you have a scenario where somebody is the president of the United States, he's essentially the president of the Western world. If you can have a scenario where you can the political opponent can take out a president or an ex-president on something minor, that's what Eric's saying, and I agree with him in this point. That destroyed the entire fabric of society. It's not a two-tiered system. The two-tiered system, I'm all for. Let's go against it. Get Nancy Pelosi and find out why she's making millions on the stock market. We'll go after all of them, but all sorts won't say that because they're establishment people. The issue here is you got a scenario where it's the president of the United States, it's the ex-president of the United States. It's when a political party takes out the leader of the opposition party. You can never have that in Western society, because once you start going down that road, you go down a road where you're basically into fascism and a totalitarian society. Hence why his argument was that these minor infractions, even if they may or may not exist, because remember, even we don't even know if he's going to be guilty of this, but even if they may or may not exist, these are overlooked. And in reality, we know they're overlooked anyway, because if it wasn't for Trump, John's right, this would have been overlooked anyway.
Sam, I have a question for you. Hold on.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, hold on, just 2 seconds. I'm sorry, I'm asking a lot of questions on this, because so this is the debate I wanted to have, but obviously we couldn't go down that path because my argument didn't work. But that's should former presidents be treated differently? And I think there is a good argument that yes, they should be treated differently because they're in a position where they're leading the entire country, and being held responsible for things like this. But then again, Fidjilo did mention that as part of the indictment they all relate to election interference. So does that? We're not talking about decisions he's made.
That's a blag again. I mean, it's a whole blag, isn't it? Election interference. If you want to talk about election interference, we know the Biden laptop was a clear example of it.
Yeah, good point.
This is actually, guess what? And this is why we need people who are in risk management. And I know, like, people in risk management, that's their job.
But Sama, where did you draw the line? Where did you draw the line? You said former presidents, and I'm not talking I'm not talking about Trump. I'm talking about every former president, from Bush to Biden.
Let me ask you, Mario. Let me ask you. So you are a businessman, right? Or even me. We're not even like some famous, or we're not the president of the United States. Let's say you were just a celebrity. You would have your team who would look for to propagate positive news about you and try and diminish the negative news, either have responses or make sure it never goes out. That's just the job of a person's team.
But if I was running for president, and I'm terrified of the law, so I wouldn't even touch anything that might be even remotely illegal, or that might be even perceived as illegal.
But that's the problem, Mario. When you don't touch those. Go ahead.
But I'm not making just so you know, I'm not making the argument, just to be clear. If anyone listening, I'm not making the argument that Trump should be indicted. I'm trying to understand, where do we draw the line? Because what we're debating now is not Trump. We're debating on former presidents should not be treated the same as a citizen when it comes to the justice system. And then if that's the case, then who decides where that line is drawn?
Mario, if that's the case, put every single president of the United States in an international criminal court. Put every single president of Russia, China, all these countries.
So no, we can't. You can't put. Hold on. You can't talk about the international criminal court relative to the U.S. justice system.
No,
so
I'm not talking
about.
No, that's not my argument. That's not my argument. My argument is, if you're going to treat a president like an average Joe, then they've been the reason for the murder of nearly every president in the whole world has been involved for it. It has been the reason of the
No,
murder
but
of
there's
somebody.
legal, but there's legal. No, legally, there's if there's any attorneys on stage, I'm not sure if there is now. But when it comes to decisions, like the U.S. military, they're not legally held responsible for those things. That's within the law. There's immunity within the law, and I'm not a lawyer, so if someone could actually
Well,
add
well,
more
well listen,
context to
Well,
it.
we're
what
not
about
thinking
the
of something
illegal
really important.
invasions? I don't think
Invasions
I
as
would
well.
like to
This
add
is
more
deciding.
context.
This is deciding. Yeah. So Grant, do you know? I think you saw. You gave a few. Grant, just from a legal perspective, you cannot put in the same basket. And again, we're making the argument just for anyone
No,
listening.
your
We're
argument is
debating.
everyone should be put
So
in the same basket. Your
so
argument
No,
is
no,
let's
no,
everyone.
talk
no, no, no. I
about.
didn't. Hold on, bro. I didn't talk about putting people in a basket. I'm saying you can't put in the basket decisions the president takes on behalf of the country as president versus decisions a president or former president or candidate takes for his personal gain unrelated to the country. So
So
if Trump sends soldiers to a country purely to go catch a guy that was harming his business, as I was talking shit about him, I know it's a stupid example, that's his personal benefit, not for that other country. But if he makes a decision for the sake of country, and Grant, any legal
Where do
understanding
you
you
draw
have
the
on this
line?
topic, Grant?
Where do you draw the
oh
No,
yeah,
line?
this is
fun
this
to
is
me.
this
I
is
would
this
fun to
is
me.
this is drawn already within the legal system,
No,
like
no.
decisions
If a
taken.
This is a
president goes
great
to
question,
war
and
because he
I'd
wants to be
really love
re-elected,
to.
because generally speaking, in the United States, the idea was that if America was in war, you generally got re-elected. That's a personal benefit. You're going to basically ensure you're president. Is that a war crime?
That's not
That's a good. Grant,
actually.
go ahead.
That's just a convention. That's not a law, and there's no force to it. But
We're talking about
let me
convention.
go back to Mario's question because it's a good one. Okay, um, the United States president enjoys something very special called official inviolability while they're in office. Okay, and that is basically immunity from being detained while they're in office because that would be an extra legal act of removal from office. That's why the only way to remove a president is either through impeachment or the use of the 25th Amendment, right? But a president can be held liable in civil court while they're in office, which happened to Bill Clinton, the whole Clinton versus Jones case, and that was the case that George Conway participated in about 25 years ago. But as we're learning with the Carroll versus Trump appeal, which is pending in the D.C. Circuit, there's some fine lines being drawn between what is official conduct by a president while they're in office and what is personal conduct. So that's a little matter that's being decided right now. But there's no question, none whatsoever, that a president or a vice president can be held liable for criminal offenses that they commit while they're in office, because committing the criminal offense is generally considered to be outside the scope of their official duties. So, for example, there was a Russian American professor who sued President Obama for repealing the Jackson-Vanik sanctions and replacing them with the Magnitsky Act sanctions. If you're into sanctions, you would know that those were the sanctions enacted during the Cold War related to Soviet Jewry, and they were replaced with the ones related to the official death of Bill Browder's auditor, and they are corruption sanctions. So anyways, point being, Obama was sued in civil court for that action. Well,
So,
he had
Grant, I just
official
want to
immunity,
clarify. I just want to
right?
clarify your point. Are you saying that basically, I just want to clarify. So, are you saying a
Yeah.
president, if he was to commit a crime while president, you can't obviously, but after he's no longer president, you can basically hold him to account for that crime?
Right. And that is what we're seeing here, penetrating the news bubbles or the analysis, the people doing the analysis that you guys are seeing. And I think that they'll really, really prove enlightening, okay? The first is that there is a state law in New York that prevents people from conspiring. And the important part is conspiring. In other words, working with others, conspiring to promote or detract from a political candidate using unlawful means. And the conspiracy part is very important here. Keep in mind that AMI, the company, already pled guilty to committing election crimes federally, right? Michael Cohen did the same thing. He pled guilty to using unlawful means to influence the election. Under the state law,
that Donald Trump is being charged under, they're alleging a conspiracy, right? A scheme between AMI, David Pecker, Cohen, and Trump. That satisfies the second prong of the felony indictment, which is not the federal crime itself, but actually the New York crime that says you may not influence an election using unlawful means. It doesn't say unlawful state means. It doesn't say unlawful federal means. It just says unlawful means. So the prosecutor's on great footing here. And I'll give you another example of a case where there's a federal crime being prosecuted in a state court in New York, and the conspirators were all convicted in federal court, but the last two conspirators are being indicted and charged and, going to trial in October in New York State Court with the same office, with the Manhattan District Attorney, which is Steve Bannon and We Build the Wall. And I have a real personal experience with that case because my reporting actually sparked the investigation that led to the arrests. Steve Bannon and We Build the Wall, the corporation, are being charged as co-defendants in a conspiracy to commit wire fraud.
Okay, Grant, we're going off track just a little bit here, so I want to kind of refocus on, the standards that we're looking at right here.
Right.
If we want to look at a similar possibility where you have, there have been a lot of talks about the Hunter Biden case in Ukraine and Joe Biden, 10% for the big guy, right? And you have Tony Bobulinski, who was a former business partner of Hunter Biden, coming out and saying that the big guy was Joe Biden. Would that not warrant a conspiracy charge for Joe Biden at this point? Because we're talking about corrupt acts here at the highest level here. Because the vice president of the United States.
Answer?
Hang on one second. Let me finish, Grant.
Well, you've given me a question. I'm ready to answer.
Well, I'm going to give you a question, but let me finish it. When we're going down this road, right? Why are we, is there a double standard here? Is that not a conspiracy? Are we not talking about Tony Bobulinski having the ability to go before a grand jury and tell them this? And, because that's what we're looking at with Michael Cohen and other people that were testifying. That's the only evidence that there seems to be.
So the answer is no, unless you have evidence that Joe Biden took an affirmative step to join the conspiracy. You do not have a conspiracy, and you haven't mentioned any of that. You just mentioned one side of the equation.
You don't think that a grand jury would end up indicting somebody on that if those charges were brought?
Okay, again, you've only got one half of the puzzle, and that's it. But that's not a very on-point case. That case is not equivalent to what is happening with Donald Trump. There is incredibly salient past precedent for what's happening with Donald Trump. And inside the indictment, there's actually a clear contrast. And that would be the case of not Hunter Biden, but Riel Hunter. You familiar with Riel Hunter? And John Edwards?
No, I'm talking about Hunter Biden.
Senator John Edwards, the man I voted for in the 2004 Democratic primary.
But that Edwards case collapsed.
Well, and I'll tell you why. The Edwards case collapsed. Why? Because they had a very difficult time proving his intent. His intent, it was very important in the federal case. And the reason being that you have to prove that he was corruptly violating that law. This is not the same exact case, but you have major differences. If you read the indictment, they sought to pay the hush money payment, the second one, only during the campaign. And their goal was to try and get out of the hush money campaign payment by basically mooting it out. As long as they got to November 8th, it didn't matter. And they even let the other woman, which is Karen McDougal, the former Playboy Playmate, they let her out of her agreement after the election, right? What that says is that he was only worried about this information becoming public during the election. And after the election, he didn't care that he wasn't trying to protect his marriage, right? He wasn't trying to protect his wife from embarrassment. After the election, they let the other woman out of her NDA. They let her speak.
But couldn't that possibly say that, there would be a lack of motive for these people to
It's quite
actually
the opposite. The motive all points to the payments being related to the election, whereas in the Edwards case, it wasn't so clear that the payments were really strictly related to the election itself. And
But
that's why
Grant, can I
he
ask
won
you a
a
question?
single count acquittal. Let me just finish so everybody
Yeah.
knows what happened. He won a single count acquittal. The jury hung on the rest of the counts. And this was after the prosecutor, this is interesting, the prosecutor who brought the charges did not take the case to trial because after he indicted Edwards, he immediately quit his position. He was a holdover from the prior administration that stayed through. He was a Bush appointee who stayed through the Obama administration because he was on the case. He indicted Edwards, dropped out, ran in the Republican primary, and became a congressman from 2013 to 2021. And even he said, this case was looked at very intensely, and everybody agreed it wasn't, even though it was a prosecution over political issues, it wasn't a politically motivated prosecution. But in any time that you're attacking or you're indicting a former high-ranking official, there's just going to be politics to it. But that is a much stronger parallel, and there are different fact patterns here. So it's a great, that's the case that everybody should be looking at to figure out, is this really something that happens? And the answer is yes.
And that was also a federal case. This is not.
It was a federal case, and it was a different set of laws. Agreed. But the circumstances are very similar in that it was the allegation that this was a political crime related to the payoff of a lover, right, to keep information quiet. And
okay, can I ask you a clarifying question on that though? Because do you think it's plausible that at no point did Donald Trump express that at least some part of his motivation in seeking to facilitate the payment to Stormy Daniels as hush money? I mean, people who say hush money because it's a more crass way to refer to a non-disclosure agreement, which is trivially commonplace, but okay, let's just go with that nomenclature of hush money. I mean, so you hold on. You don't think it's plausible that at any point Trump expressed that part of his motivation for facilitating that payment was indeed to do with his private affairs, meaning he did not want the embarrassment to befall his family for that information becoming public. He would face embarrassment that was separate and apart from the campaign. I even remember him in the one of the debates of Hillary Clinton announcing that he had apologized to his wife Melania because of the Access Hollywood recording, because it suggested some measure of, I guess, infidelity on his part. And my understanding of the relevant campaign finance law is again, this is more on a federal level, so I don't even know how it necessarily translates on a state level. But if there's any quantity of the motive for facilitating a payment that has to do with something non-campaign related, such as eliminating or forestalling the embarrassment that could arise from the revelation of this information, then that doesn't bear directly on campaign finance law to the requisite standard. Is that wrong?
Okay, so I think those are valid ideas to consider, but when you read the New York State election law, and then you read the indictment, I think it becomes clear that the key role that the federal law plays is that these two men took plea deals, or these two groups, they already pled out. His conspirators already pled to the federal charges.
Okay, but do you know why people plead guilty?
But they're not named as
federal
conspirators,
charges like
Grant.
But I'll tell you why. Because
there is no formal allegation of conspiracy. There's an informal allegation of a quote scheme. But there are potential. Hold on. But there are potential criminal statutes that could have been brought related to a conspiracy that were not brought. Instead, Bragg decided to replicate the same charge 34 times.
Yes, and you know why? It's called prosecutorial efficiency. He brought the same charge all those many times because, hear me out. He brought the charge because each act is a chargeable offense. Okay, that's a cause of action. So each act, each concealment, right? All of these 34 acts were taken in furtherance of one conspiracy, right? he could have charged one conspiracy to do whatever, but I believe that he's going with the
Or he couldn't meet the
simplest
evidentiary
charge.
burden of proving a conspiracy and chose not to charge it.
Because it's the easiest thing there is. It's called res judicata and collateral estoppel. You can't relitigate something that's already been decided. Okay? Those two doctrines are very important in the courts. So once there's a case and it's decided, it's been litigated, okay? The criminal cases are done. They lost. You can't change those facts. Those facts are set in stone as far as Donald Trump is concerned, right? They're enough to prove the misdemeanor of a conspiracy happening. And we have the tapes, and we have those people cooperating with prosecutors.
I don't think that's true.
Yeah, we have the tape.
Bragg disclaims any obligation. I'm sorry for the faucet running. Bragg disclaims any obligation to prove that the payment to Stormy Daniels is illegal. He just asserts it on the basis of Michael Cohen's federal plea agreement. So that somehow absolves absolves Bragg on any level pertaining to his purview so he can allege illegal conduct that Trump is implicated in and not have to prove that the conduct is illegal. That's absurd.
So Michael, just listen. So once there's a judgment in a case and a plea agreement, a conviction, that's a judgment in a criminal case. It's a final judgment, okay? It was never challenged. It's done. Whatever is done is done. Those agreements are final judgments as far as the court system is concerned, right? You can't go back and relitigate a final judgment. What a final judgment has the effect of doing in the court system is establishing the facts. Those facts are established. Michael Cohen pled guilty, and he pled guilty to a very specific set of facts. The AMI folks, they pled guilty to a different specific set of facts, okay? They engaged in a deferred prosecution agreement, which, if memory serves me correctly, unusually required them to cooperate with state investigators, state prosecutors. But those are established. You can't go back and re-argue it. It's done. It's history. It's in the books.
But Grant,
so Donald Trump has no opportunity.
You're talking about somebody that pleaded guilty here to a federal charge, right? After he had lied to Congress, right?
But AMI didn't plead. AMI had a non-prosecution agreement, Grant. They didn't plead guilty to anything.
Yeah, deferred prosecution.
Grant, listen to this.
Right.
Listen to me, Grant. I'm asking you right now. If you are facing federal charges here, where you have a 98 to 99% conviction rate, are you not going to take a plea deal at that point? Yes or no?
Motivations just don't bear on the legal impact of final judgments in future proceedings. That's just how it is. I'm sorry. You lose.
But this guy, we're talking about a guy that literally wrote a book. You're talking about Michael Cohen, who literally wrote a book called Revenge. Okay? How can this guy's testimony be trusted to come in and we're talking about this guy was the star witness here for the grand jury. How do you trust that grand jury testimony?
I'll tell you, it's very simple. He has documentary evidence to back up everything, and the documents themselves are what the crime is focused on. If you notice, it's not a charge of conspiracy where you have to prove that Cohen is telling the truth. This is what's called a documentary case, okay? Are the documents true or false, okay? Was there a legal retainer, true or false? Well, it's already been an established fact that there was no legal retainer.
Okay, but he was already retained. He was retained for like 15 years before this.
Okay, so what was the legal matter he was retained to represent Donald Trump personally for?
Was he not Donald Trump's general counsel?
No.
Was this not?
Alan Garber is the general counsel and is the general counsel of the Trump organization.
Attorney.
Let me explain something to you that people learned about 5 years ago in the headlines, right? And I'm not blaming you for not seeing this because this is like kind of in the weeds. But if somebody's not working on an actual legal engagement with a legal retainer, then they're not acting as a lawyer. Even though they are a lawyer, they're not performing lawyer services at that point. And this is what happened there. There was a false retainer, talked about, but it didn't exist. There was no legal retainer. This was just an agreement to reimburse Michael Cohen for expenses, number one, which everybody seems to forget. There's a $50,000 expense. We don't know what it is. And then also to pay him for the to give him money for doing the Stormy Daniels deal and to pay him back.
Grant, can I ask you a question? I'm sorry. So,
hold on.
What was
I want to make. Give me 1 second. I need.
No,
two
but
seconds.
this is important because it's going to get glossed over.
Okay.
I'm sorry to interject, but you said before that it's already been established and is therefore no longer challengeable that the Stormy Daniels payment was, quote, illegal, right?
Unlawful.
But what was established by Cohen's guilty plea was that his conduct vis-a-vis the transmission of that payment was, quote, illegal because he pleaded guilty to it. Not that Donald Trump's conduct was illegal, whereas Bragg in this indictment just asserts flatly as though it's objective fact in every potential dimension that the payment was illegal, and then that illegality bears on Trump, but Trump doesn't get an opportunity to contest that claim of illegality because he's not actually charged with anything to do with the payment itself.
So he repaid the payment. He signed the actual checks. Okay.
Right. And they're claiming the method by which Trump reimbursed Cohen was legal, not that Trump's involvement in the payment to Stormy Daniels, the initial payment to Stormy Daniels, constituted anything illegal.
So let me go over this with you really as briefly as I can. But can I mention something else first, off track, and then I promise I'll tell you about all the illegal stuff that the FEC came up with. Okay, good. So justsecurity.org, which is a blog run by lawyers with, DOJ experience, a fantastic, well-written, well-researched blog.
It's national security apparatchiks. But go ahead.
Yeah, they went through and reviewed all of the cases that the Manhattan DA has charged this same Class E felony with, right? And they cited cases as big as $5,000 or $6,000 and as small as a shoplifting case where somebody took clothes to a retailer and caused them to be returned even though they hadn't been purchased in the first place, then used the store credit to steal about $100 worth of clothes. And they got convicted of a felony, which was causing a false statement to be entered into a business record, the false return, and that was the felony crime. And the crime that they were, the second crime was shoplifting. Okay, so that's how granular this little crime is prosecuted in this district. Let
me push back on that, Grant.
I'm just telling you an example. But
Grant,
regarding the payments,
Grant,
the FEC's general counsel.
Grant,
sure.
Give me 1 second, please.
Of course.
You're talking about the ex-president of the United States, a current presidential candidate. And so, granular prosecution of certain things, I don't think it holds water here. And I'm really concerned.
You're focusing on the word granular, as in $100 crime could be a felony under this statute, and this is $420,000.
That's not quite.
Continue.
I don't think that's the point, though. I mean, sorry, maybe I can anticipate what Trash is going to say here, because it's not. If Trump had committed a shoplifting crime that caused a false record to be inputted into the ledger of some corporation, then you would have an argument that. Nope, no one's above the law, including the president. Therefore, Trump committed the same crime. He ought to be charged, notwithstanding his status as a former president. But that's not the case here. What they've done is created what I think you would have to concede is a novel theory.
Not novel.
So there's nothing novel around
the
interpolation of federal offenses into a state context to enhance the misdemeanor and bring it past
it's not an interpolation. It's not interpolation. You're looking at this through the lens of a very malleable set of facts, but the facts aren't as malleable as you think they are in this case because
they're very malleable because the illegal payment. When Bragg asserts that the payment to Stormy Daniels was, quote, illegal, is he referring to state or federal law there? There's been no establishment that it was illegal on a state level.
The facts are unitary. So his system is dual sovereignty.
The malleability is found in his text. It's not my interpretation.
Listen, you're missing the point here. Dual sovereignty doesn't mean dual sets of facts. All right, you're thinking okay, the facts only apply in federal court, or the facts only apply in state court if the fact is state or federal. That's not how courts work anywhere. In fact, internationally, it doesn't work. We have MLATs. So the facts that happen in Sweden are the same facts that happen in American court too. Okay, but believe me, between state and federal, the facts are still the same.
What?
In other words, like you're convicted of a federal crime.
So if Sweden found the payment illegal, then you could cite Swedish law?
No, I'm saying that if he committed a crime in Sweden and covered it up in America, then yeah, I guess you could go after it. But that's very silly hypothetical. My point being that facts are not separate just because the systems themselves are separate, the state and federal systems. They're interwoven. We have one justice system. We just have dual sovereignty to administer it, the federal government and the state governments. And I know.
But Bragg is using the dual sovereignty to relieve himself of the burden of proving the illegality that he asserts.
So I'm going to jump in if you don't mind,
he's
actually.
just asserting established facts.
So I talked about this before.
From
Sorry,
one court,
Grant.
it can be cited in others. That's it.
He doesn't have to actually prove the underlying crime. All he has to do is prove. I mentioned this earlier. I don't know if you were here. All he has to do is prove the intent. Well, no, he has to prove the intent. So the second element.
No, he just has to prove that Donald Trump took overt.
So if you read the jury charge, for 175.10, I posted it last night. I predicted everything that was going to play out today. If you read the jury charge, the second element includes intent. It's a necessary element of the charge. So he has to intend to defraud or to cover up a crime. It 100% requires intent. That's what he has to prove. He doesn't have to litigate whether or not he's guilty of an underlying crime. Furthermore, it doesn't matter whether somebody else pled guilty to that crime at the federal level.
Intended to cause this, right? Sure. So
but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what anybody else pled to in a federal case. Somebody else's plea is irrelevant for his case at the state level.
Okay. So first of all, just to set this straight before I tell you what I'm about to tell you.
Well,
right?
Okay, but
when I talk about a tape, hold on. When I talk about a tape,
this is a good. Go ahead.
I just got a message from a trial lawyer that's directly pertinent. Let me just read it aloud really quickly, and then I'll shut up.
No, please let me finish.
Go ahead.
I'll finish. Look.
Okay, it'll take 2 seconds. It'll take 2 seconds because I want you to address.
Go ahead, Michael. Go ahead.
Hold on a second. Somebody who's a trial lawyer just messaged me this right now. He was referring to you, Grant. He says the guy who is claiming that the illegality of Cohen's conduct is criminal conduct is established against Trump by virtue of Cohen's guilty plea is dead wrong. Res juridicata does not operate against strangers to litigation. You are quite right that it would violate Trump's due process to challenge the issue. Alvin Bragg still bears the burden of establishing the illegality of the scheme, and I would go so far as to say that the fact that Cohen pleaded guilty is inadmissible entirely.
Correct.
Okay, let me just finish what I was going to say about the tape, and then we can continue because the tape is okay. So
answer this question because it just drags on too long. Let's be specific.
I'm going to be very succinct, if you don't mind. May I? I'll just as quick as possible.
Yeah, about this issue. Go ahead.
Yeah. So look, the tape is not evidence, right? The tape is an exhibit. Cohen's testimony will be evidence. His testimony about the tape, but the tape corroborates his testimony strongly. And in the tape that we've all heard, Donald Trump can be heard to direct the first payoff, the Karen McDougal payoff, and then talk about doing it in cash. Why would you want to do it in cash? If you look at all the facts put together, I think it's not going to be hard to say that there's corroborating significant evidence that points to Donald Trump's intent. Period. And then
are you suggesting that paying somebody in cash is a reason to believe that there was some nefarious activity going on?
The fact, the way that they handled it, which was to try and make it go away.
That's what you're saying. You're saying yes. You're using that as a reason.
I'm saying the answer is yes, and I'll tell you why. Look at the case of Dennis Hastert. He went to jail for violating the Patriot Act by violating anti-terrorism laws. And making doing what's it called? He was paying hush money to a teenage boy that he had speaker.
Yeah, but that's
Hastert.
implying.
So
that's
this
not
is
the
why,
same thing.
This is why
wanting to pay in cash is not demonstrative of intent.
There's all sorts of problems when you go to use the banking system to do some of these things.
No.
And
President that everybody should be wary of, irrespective of Trump, whether you like him or not, because that empowers you to contest that claim.
The only
You
way
know
that
what?
Cohen's plea is in any way relevant is it's going to be used to impeach his credibility because he's an admitted perjurer. Besides that, his plea has no viability whatsoever.
I mean,
Name,
look.
name
Okay,
your
so
contact.
I want to jump in here real
Yeah,
quick with a
now.
question for all source, if I can.
Sure.
So normally these charges would be brought when an entity or person incurred loss. Usually money and restitution would be ordered. Where's the loss
No.
here? Who
No,
incurred the loss?
that's
The
not how these
Democratic
charges
Party in
work.
2016, or
That's not how these charges work at all. They're
Okay.
not brought when somebody
Well, I was
incurs a
directing that
loss.
to all source. So if I can get all
I
source
mean-
to jump in there, that would be great. So
All sauce.
Yeah, he'll be right back. It's messing up.
no, of
Name,
course. It's-
name, never redacted.
Well, I've already said my opinion on this case, and I'm not going to get into back and forth on the details. I just want to say just something more broad regarding when Eric was on about his comment on the justice system being on trial. I think we need to take a step back and realize that there is a broader reckoning with the establishment itself. You have the mainstream media's credibility has been eroding. The financial authorities are under the microscope, and we see the US dollar being weaponized and used as a tool to further certain geopolitical agendas. We see the justice system has been politicized, as we saw with the raid on Mar-a-Lago, and now this weak indictment of Trump. We see the government and the intelligence community collaborating with social media platforms to censor Americans. And now we see Congress attempting to pass a restrictive law under false pretenses with this monstrosity of a bill called the Restrict Act, which we've talked for hours on. The bottom line is the establishment is rapidly losing credibility, and they are resorting to desperate measures to retain power as they sense the public awakening to their hubris and the fact that their control is slipping away. That's it.
Okay, so I want to go back to all source with my question because I feel like this is fairly important. We hit on this just a little bit earlier, but this is what I want to know. Charges would typically be brought when an entity or person incurred a loss, usually monetarily, and restitution would be ordered. Where is the loss here? Who incurred the loss? Was it the Democratic Party in 2016? I mean, why are we even doing this to begin with?
Hillary Clinton, because she lost. Very easy.
Okay, so
the claim is that New York State was defrauded, isn't it? So New York State incurred the loss.
If Hillary won, we wouldn't be talking about this.
Bingo.
Well, exactly.
Well, the claim is actually that the voters are defrauded.
Is that not my point, Grant? If Hillary Clinton
well, Bragg doesn't specify who was defrauded.
Because nobody would care. Nobody would care because there was no victim here. Am I right or wrong? Who is the victim, Grant?
The victim is the state of New York.
Yeah, there was also no victim in the Ricky Vaughn case, but you saw how that went.
Well, right, but I mean, if Bragg is going to say that Trump committed falsified bank records with the intent to defraud, at some point you think he's going to have to specify who's actually being defrauded, because it seems like the only person who would have been defrauded if no charges had been brought is Trump himself, because these were internal Trump organization records, right? They had no bearing on tax law or anything else. It was all deposited into internal Trump organization records.
Yeah, you don't need to claim it. No. Essentially, he's saying that you're defrauding the voters by having an in-kind contribution that you're not reporting.
He's not saying that. He could say that, but he hasn't said it.
No, he will. He hasn't said that yet, but he will.
Okay, I mean, you can speculate that he will.
Grant, you're saying that the state of New York was the victim here. Can you tell me how the state of New York was victimized in this case?
Look,
please, and be brief. I'm sure
are you familiar with New York's enterprise crime laws? Are you familiar with those?
I mean, just be brief. Explain it for the audience here.
Well, I mean, the mafia used to control garbage pickup in New York City. And one of the things that they were doing is running criminal enterprises. And so New York passed a long series over many, many years, a series of tough business laws to prevent criminals from using businesses, which are corporations that are registered with the state, to commit crime. And so the state of New York actually exercises very powerful interest over policing its businesses to prevent them from engaging in fraud, misconduct, crime. I mean, this is not Donald Trump's first trip down that block. Look,
okay, so the state didn't lose any revenue, but somehow
down.
they're still a victim. It sounds like that's kind of where we're
It's
getting at
not,
here. Dr.
there are
Gorka,
laws
I want to
to
go to you. I want to welcome you back to the stage here. There's been a lot that's been going on today. You've seen now the charges against President Trump. I'd love your overall opinions. We're talking about 34 felonies here, Dr. Gorka.
But we're not. We're not. So as Kevin McCarthy,
I'm sorry, 34 felony charges.
Yeah,
Dr. Gorka, is he a medical doctor?
No, I'm a PhD, shithead.
Okay.
What's your problem?
Yeah,
It's
incredibly obnoxious when people refer to themselves as doctor when they have no
Michael,
medical.
You don't have to be an MD to be a doctor,
I asked
shithead.
Dr. Gorka a question.
You can be a
you seem a bit
I
mad.
would mute him
Go
if I
ahead.
could. Can we get somebody to mute Michael, please?
God, what a dickhead!
I'm muting myself.
God, can you mute yourself forever?
Dr. Gorka.
Please, thank you. Good. So it's not Andy McCarthy and even Jonathan Turley made this superb point. I wish I could recall the Latin term, but there is a aspect of prosecutorial abuse where you take one charge, and if it has multiple facets, you multiply it to look as if multiple crimes have been committed just to make your case look stronger. And if you read through the whole indictment, you see that's exactly what occurred here. It is the misstatement of business records on ledgers or invoices that has been multiplied 34 times. So, number one, there's this very clear thin, wafer thin case that they're trying to look like occurred, multiple dozens of times. Secondly, there's that amazing moment. I don't know if you played the audio from Bragg's unbelievable presser, where I think it was actually a member of the mainstream media, shockingly, asked the question saying the crime has not been, the felony has not been mentioned. What has been mentioned 34 times is that a misdemeanor, with the misstatement of a business, a fact, a business filing, was used to cover up a later crime. D.A. Bragg, why didn't you mention the crime that you are prosecuting, the felony that you're prosecuting President Trump for? And Bragg actually says on video in front of the nation, because I don't have to. So you're bringing the first ever historic prosecution for a felony against the former president who is the leader of the opposition. And you're telling the world, I don't have to tell you what the felony is I'm charging him with. So, and then to go to I just literally came in a few minutes ago, to go to all this, how you connect it to state election crimes, which D.A. Bragg has no jurisdiction over, and how you bring it to some kind of weird IRS, he accrued a benefit that he should have declared. You're going to have to prove, and this is why if the judge is fair, and we know his daughter worked for Kamala Harris, and we know he's a Democrat donor, we get it, but the fact that he, refused to gag the president was interesting today. The first thing that the judge should consider is that as a fact of law, there is no way to prove that President Trump wasn't defending his family, his relationships with his wife, and just his general prove that. And if you can't prove that, the idea that
things about his wife or what have you, that would be sufficient to render the charge moot, because
you have to
actually need to commit a crime. He just needs to have the intent. So if they have witnesses, if they have Cohen, who's obviously an admitted person, all they have is that testimony and no audio or no written evidence, then it's nonsensical and it's not going to go anywhere.
Well, of course, the burden is on the burden is on the state. But if the extenuating illegality that's being asserted has to do with the payment to Stormy Daniels itself being in some sense illegal, and that's being used to enhance these state-based offenses into something like a felony, then you could see a viable defense strategy potentially being to chip away at the state's argument that the payment was illegal in the sense that it bore exclusively on an attempt to influence the election. If it could be established by the defense that it also bore on Trump's private considerations around not wanting the divulgence of embarrassing information because of familial, concerns or what have you, then that could be something that, I would think his defense team would want to consider raising.
Look, you need to look at the statement of facts, number 19. The defendant directed lawyer A, Michael Cohen, to delay making a payment to woman 2 as long as possible. He instructed lawyer A that if they could delay the payment until after the election, they could avoid paying altogether, because at that point it would not matter if the story became public, as reflected in the emails and text messages between and amongst lawyer A,
politically
lawyer
motivated. Does this not seem like it would be politically motivated to try to push these allegations by these random idiots that have come out of the woodwork here to make these accusations against somebody that is a front runner for president of the United States? Does that seem not like a reasonable strategy to use if you're trying to counter that?
And Grant, that doesn't establish that the motivation was exclusively related to influencing the election. It could just that be whatever part of the motivation had to do with influencing the election.
It's enough.
Hinged on the timing of
primary
the
motivation. I mean, what other motivation was there if they didn't care if it became public after the election? What other motivation?
You don't know that they quote didn't care. It's just that the motivation.
That would be assuming facts, not in evidence. You can't make that assumption. You'd be assuming facts, not in evidence, to read his mind. That doesn't make any sense. You can't do that.
Depositions, sworn depositions already. Do you think that they would put something into this indictment
from
that
Donald
isn't
Trump?
From a sworn deposition? And plus, they have emails and text messages to
There's
back
sworn
this
positions
up.
from Donald Trump that bear on his intent in
Donald Trump
expressing a desire to delay the payment.
But look, Donald Trump could have gone to the grand jury and made his case.
And incriminated himself.
They invited him to speak, and he would have waived his right.
And any defense attorney would have been insane to advise him to do that, as you well know.
So literally, no attorney that has come up on this stage, conservative or liberal, just for the record, has said that they would ever suggest that their client go in front of a grand jury.
Specifically, Donald Trump.
Of course not. Yeah, definitely not. But I'm just telling you.
So Nick, can I ask you a question?
Trump or not?
Don't raise anything he said in his defense, because he hasn't raised his voice.
Yeah. I want to bring all sorts in here, actually, because ask me a question.
I think the issue that we're running into is, and again, I think this is the fundamental, like our democratic system, the justice, and the law, is that one, we need to. I'm sorry, the FEC is a joke. It's a joke. They have no enforcement mechanism. They can barely get into agreement on anything, right? And I think that's the bridge to this issue
but
that
also,
we have
is
of like
their enforcement mechanism not fines? Because that's typically what they would impose for something like this. But in this case, they.
But even they imposed for Obama.
I agree.
But
but
the FEC
the FEC routinely issues fines.
But it's come on. Like, I don't think anybody would really consider. Yeah, let me push it onto you, Grant, because I think I'll say my comment. I'll push it onto you. I think that's why there's a shock of this, and I think this is why we're having this conversation about like this back and forth.
Sure.
It is because it's just we have such a weak laws in the election and the way that we imposed it, which I believe should be stronger. And I think I think maybe this is a lesson learned. And ideally, I don't think it's never going to happen because it doesn't benefit DC, either political party, to have a strong FEC with strong. I think that's the issue. Weak enforcement on our election laws.
Oh, I agree.
Okay, but you say weak enforcement. If it's weak enforcement, if the penalties aren't high enough, Well, how come we're not even using the low penalties?
Well, hold on. It's not about the high or low penalties. Can I talk about this for a second? Because I agree with you that the FEC is not doing a good enough job of enforcing the law, but there's some structural reasons why. Okay? You're talking about a board that has 6 members and it's partisan and it's 3-3, right? And you need a majority to prosecute a case. Why are there not 3 independent members of this board? Why are there not 3 NPA members of the FEC? So we have a 9-member commission that can make a decision up or down instead of this deadlock that we always have. This was the weird design they came up with after Nixon, and it needs to be reformed. In this particular case, the general counsel of the FEC recommended charges against Donald Trump, the Trump Organization, and Michael Cohen civilly for violating the FEC Act in this case. But it was voted down 3-3.
That's the problem, Nick. I think that's the problem.
Just to conclude here, this was voted down.
3-3.
Because it's a partisan organization. That's the problem. Because the problem, Nick, and I think
crazy.
This is the issue, Nick, is that the FEC is a political body and it benefits the people in power in Washington. If there's deadlock, there's deadlock, right? We are having this conversation about our election system. It benefits the elites. It benefits Trump. It benefits Biden. It benefits Clinton. It benefits Obama. It benefits whoever, of course, they don't want strong enforcement on election laws. And that's the fundamental problem. If we want to strengthen our democracy, we should have an FEC that is independent, that has prosecutorial powers, either through the prosecutor, the federal prosecutors, or even states if it's in the interest of the states as well. Because I think this is the issue, because we just widely accept, that's elections. He did this. No, that's regardless of whichever political candidate. And we just because they should be held at a higher bar than everybody else. If you're a political leader, you should be of a higher bar. I'm not saying you should be everybody's morally corrupt in one way or another. We all have our flaws, but at least the bar should be significantly higher. And I think stronger election reforms and laws and enforcement of those, both criminally and civilly, are much to make sure this is not a shock.
Okay, so Jason, I'm going to get to you here in just a second, if that's okay, unless you have a comment. On this very specific topic here.
I do, very specific. Across the Rubicon of this prosecution. Impeachment is now standard practice. We censure federal cabinet officials. We bring in special counsels. These are the signals that we need to be paying attention to, not the noise of the legal minutia.
Got it. So Dr. Gorka, I want to ask you a question here, because this is something that from in our comment section, as well as from the general population, is bringing this case, bringing these charges, is it worth the damage done to the okay? And now we're bringing felony charges, and I want to remind the audience here that felony charges in common law were originally meant to carry the death penalty. Felony literally